The Return of Sherlock Holmes, 1905. Episode 6, The Adventure of Black Peter. Welcome back, fellow detectives. After navigating the twisted politics of aristocratic families, you might think we've seen the worst that human nature has to offer. But today's case takes us into a world of maritime brutality, where a man's violent past catches up with him in the most literal way imaginable. Have you ever wondered what kind of strength it would take to drive a harpoon completely through a human body? What kind of rage, what kind of desperation could fuel such a savage act? Prepare yourself for one of the most physically brutal crimes in Holmes's casebook, a murder so violent that even seasoned police inspectors turned pale at the sight. Picture yourself at Baker Street on a foggy July morning in 1895. You're having breakfast with Holmes when you notice something peculiar. His right hand is bandaged, and there are scratches on his face. Watson, ever the doctor, immediately shows concern. "Holmes, what happened to you? Have you been in an accident?" Holmes waves away the worry with a slight smile. "Nothing so dramatic, Watson. I've been conducting experiments at the butcher shop in Leadenhall Market. I needed to understand the mechanics of a particular type of weapon. Specifically, what kind of force would be required to drive a whaling harpoon through a human body." You and Watson exchange startled glances. "A harpoon murder?" Watson asks. "Has Scotland Yard consulted you on a new case?" Holmes nods, finishing his coffee. "Inspector Hopkins telegraphed yesterday. There's been a murder in Sussex. A retired sea captain found pinned to the wall of his cabin by a harpoon through his chest. The local police are baffled, and Hopkins suspects it will take more than ordinary detective work to solve." Think about this for a moment, detective. What kind of killer uses a harpoon as a murder weapon? Someone with maritime experience, certainly, but also someone with tremendous strength and likely tremendous rage. What could drive a person to such savage violence? The victim is, or was, Peter Carey, known locally as Black Peter due to his dark moods and violent temper, Holmes explains as he gathers his notes. He was a whaling captain who retired 5 years ago and built himself a small cabin in the woods near his house where he spent his evenings drinking alone. 3 days ago, his body was found in that cabin, impaled to the wooden wall. Watson looks disturbed. "Good Lord, that's barbaric." Holmes's expression is grim. "Indeed. And what makes it more puzzling is that Black Peter was himself a powerful man, experienced in violence. He wouldn't have been easy to overcome. Yet someone managed to kill him in the very cabin where he kept his collection of maritime souvenirs, including the harpoon that killed him. The journey to Forest Row in Sussex takes them through pleasant countryside that belies the violence of their destination. They're met by Inspector Stanley Hopkins, a young and ambitious detective who greatly admires Holmes's methods. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Holmes," Hopkins says earnestly. "This case has me completely stumped. I've arrested a suspect, young John Nelligan, whose father's name was found in the victim's notebook. But I'm not entirely convinced he's our killer. The case has too many peculiar elements." Holmes and Watson examine the murder scene, a small wooden cabin built separately from the main house, designed to resemble a ship's cabin. It's filled with maritime instruments, charts, and souvenirs from Peter Carey's whaling days. On one wall hangs a collection of harpoons, one conspicuously missing from its brackets. "This is where he was found." Hopkins indicates a dark stain on the wooden wall. "The harpoon went completely through his body and 6 inches into the wall behind him. He was pinned there like a beetle in a collector's case. The doctor said death would have been instantaneous." Holmes examines the scene with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the wall, the remaining harpoons, and the position of the furniture. "The force required would be extraordinary," he murmurs. "Tell me, Inspector, what kind of man was Peter Carey?" Hopkins's expression darkens. "A devil of a man by all accounts. He was a successful whaling captain in his day, but brutal to his crews. They called him Black Peter not just for his dark moods, but for the black rage that came over him when drunk. He beat his wife and daughter regularly, terrorized the neighborhood, and spent his evenings alone in this cabin drinking rum and brooding." "Not a man who would be much mourned," Watson observes. Holmes shakes his head. "Murder is murder, Watson, regardless of the victim's character. though I'll admit it does expand our suspect list considerably. A man who terrorizes everyone around him for decades accumulates enemies like a ship accumulates barnacles. What can you tell me about your suspect? Holmes asks. Hopkins pulls out his notes. John Nelligan, 26 years old, son of a banker named Dawson Nelligan, who disappeared 5 years ago after his bank collapsed. Young Nelligan claims he came to Sussex searching for information about his father. Apparently Peter Carey was one of the last people to see Dawson Nelligan alive. Holmes's eyebrows rise with interest. A missing banker and a murdered sea captain. Tell me more about this connection. Hopkins explains. The elder Nelligan's bank failed, and he disappeared with a substantial sum of money. Peter Carey's name appeared in some of Nelligan's papers, suggesting they had business dealings. The son has been trying to clear his father's name, prove he didn't steal the money. And you believe John Nelligan killed Carey to silence him? Holmes asks. Hopkins looks uncertain. He was found near the cabin the night of the murder. He admits he came to confront Carey about his father. But here's what troubles me. Young Nelligan is a slightly built clerk, barely 10 stone. How could he have driven a harpoon through a powerful man like Black Peter with enough force to pin him to a wall? This is a crucial observation, detective. Think about the physical mechanics of this crime. A harpoon isn't a knife. It's a heavy weapon designed to pierce whale blubber and be thrown from a moving ship. The strength required to thrust it through a man's body with such force would be tremendous. Could a slight clerk really accomplish such a feat? Holmes examines the cabin more thoroughly, and his trained eye catches something everyone else missed. Tobacco ash of an unusual type, signs that someone had been hiding in the cabin before the murder, and most tellingly, traces of seal oil and blubber on the floor. Inspector Hopkins, Holmes says slowly, your suspect is innocent. John Nelligan may have come to confront Black Peter, but he didn't kill him. The murderer was someone else entirely, someone with maritime experience, tremendous strength, and knowledge of how to use a harpoon. But who? Hopkins asks, frustrated. Holmes's eyes gleam. Someone who's been hunting Black Peter for 5 years. Someone who finally tracked him down and executed him with a weapon both symbolic and practical. We need to investigate Black Peter's past, specifically his final voyage as captain of the Sea Unicorn. Holmes sends telegrams to various maritime authorities and begins piecing together Peter Carey's history. The story that emerges is one of violence, betrayal, and a crime committed at sea that remained hidden for years. 5 years ago, Peter Carey commanded the whaling ship Sea Unicorn on what would be his final voyage. Among his crew was a Norwegian harpooner named Patrick Cairns, a giant of a man, tremendously strong, and one of the most skilled harpooners in the whaling fleet. During that voyage, something happened that caused Carey to return to England and abruptly retire from the sea. What happened on that final voyage? Watson asks. Holmes spreads out shipping records and crew manifests. That's what we need to discover. But I suspect it involves Dawson Nelligan, the missing banker. Notice the timing. Nelligan disappeared just as the Sea Unicorn returned to port, both events connected to Peter Carey. Holmes devises a plan to draw out the real killer. He places advertisements in all the maritime newspapers, announcing that artifacts from the Sea Unicorn are being auctioned, including the ship's logbook. If my theory is correct, Holmes explains, someone will come seeking that logbook, someone who desperately needs to know what Peter Carey recorded about that final voyage. They set up watch in Black Peter's cabin, waiting through the night. Near midnight, a huge figure approaches through the darkness, a man of enormous size and strength, moving with the careful stealth of someone used to stalking prey. The man enters the cabin and begins searching frantically through Peter Carey's papers. Looking for something? Holmes asks calmly, lighting a lamp. The giant spins around, and you see his face clearly, weathered by years at sea, scarred, with the cold eyes of a predator. I'm Patrick Cairns, he says in a thick Norwegian accent, and I killed Peter Carey. But before you judge me, let me tell you why. Holmes nods. I suspected as much. The harpoon, the strength required, the seal oil on your boots, all pointed to a professional whaler. Tell us your story, Mr. Cairns. Cairns sinks into a chair, his massive shoulders sagging. 5 years ago, I was harpooner on the Sea Unicorn. We were returning from Arctic waters when we encountered a small boat adrift, barely more than a dinghy. In it was a dying man, half frozen, clutching a sealed tin box. "Dawson Nelligan," Holmes interjects. Cairns nods. We didn't know his name then. Captain Carey brought him aboard, saw he was dying and tried to revive him, but the man died within hours. That's when Carey opened the tin box and found what was inside. Securities and bonds worth thousands of pounds. The story unfolds like a dark tale from the depths. Carey decided to keep the money, to let the world think Nelligan had drowned at sea with his stolen fortune. He ordered us to say nothing, to throw the body overboard. Most of the crew never knew what happened, but I was there. I saw everything. Carey promised me a share of the money to keep quiet. Cairns continues, his voice bitter. But when we reached port, he paid me off with barely £50 and told me to disappear. I was young, stupid, and afraid. I took the money and ran. But for 5 years it's eaten at me. The thought of that poor man dying, his body thrown to the sharks, his name ruined as a thief, while Carey lived comfortable on stolen money. Think about the moral complexity here, Detective. Cairns is confessing to murder, but he's also revealing that he killed a man who was himself guilty of theft, fraud, and disposing of a corpse. Does Black Peter's guilt make Cairns' revenge any more justifiable? "So I tracked Carey down," Cairns says. "Learned he'd retired to Sussex, built himself a cabin full of maritime memories. I came to confront him, to demand he tell the truth about Nelligan, return the stolen securities to the man's family. But when I arrived, Carey was drunk and violent. He attacked me with a knife, called me a blackmailing dog. We fought." Cairns's voice drops to a whisper. "He was strong, even drunk and older, but I was stronger. I grabbed a harpoon from the wall, a weapon I'd used 1,000 times on whales. In my rage, I struck him as I'd struck so many sea creatures. The harpoon went through him and into the wall, and suddenly he was dead, and I was a murderer." Holmes regards him steadily. "Why didn't you flee immediately?" Cairns looks ashamed. "I panicked. I searched for the tin box for the securities, thinking I could at least return them to clear Nelligan's name, but I couldn't find them. Carey must have hidden them elsewhere. When I heard someone coming, I ran into the woods. I've been hiding nearby ever since, trying to find the courage to either turn myself in or disappear forever. The securities," Holmes says, "are hidden in the cabin. Peter Carey built a secret compartment beneath the floorboards. Inspector Hopkins, if you'll help me." Together they pry up a section of flooring and discover a sealed tin box containing bonds and securities worth over £40,000, the money Dawson Nelligan supposedly stole. Hopkins places Cairns under arrest, but his voice is sympathetic. "You'll be tried for murder, but the circumstances will be considered. Peter Carey attacked you and you acted in self-defense. That counts for something." Cairns nods wearily. "I'm not asking for mercy. I killed a man, even if he deserved it. But at least now the truth about Nelligan will come out. His son will know his father wasn't a thief who abandoned his family. He was a desperate man who died trying to escape his creditors." The trial of Patrick Cairns becomes a sensation. The story of Black Peter's villainy, the revelation of Dawson Nelligan's true fate, and Cairns's 5-year struggle with conscience captures public imagination. Cairns is ultimately convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, receiving a sentence of 15 years rather than hanging. John Nelligan is cleared of all suspicion, and more importantly, his father's name is restored. The recovered securities are returned to the Nelligan family creditors, proving that Dawson Nelligan had been trying to save his failing bank rather than steal from it. He remains a tragic figure, but no longer a villain. Back at Baker Street, Holmes and Watson discuss the case over brandy. "A grim affair," Watson observes. "Black Peter sounds like a thoroughly evil man, yet he was still murdered." Holmes nods thoughtfully. "That's what makes this case so unsettling. Peter Carey terrorized his family, brutalized his crews, stole from a dying man, and destroyed an innocent man's reputation. By any moral accounting, the world is better without him. Yet Patrick Cairns still committed murder," Holmes continues. "He let his rage overcome his judgment and killed a man in a moment of violence. The law must punish him, even though his victim was himself a criminal." Justice isn't about weighing which party is more guilty. It's about maintaining the rule of law. But 15 years instead of hanging, Watson points out. The jury recognized the circumstances. Holmes allows a slight smile. Indeed, and I suspect Patrick Cairns will emerge from prison a better man than Black Peter ever was. Conscience has a way of reforming those who possess it, while men like Peter Carey never develop one no matter how long they live. You ask the question that's been bothering you. Holmes, why did you conduct those experiments with harpoons at the butcher shop? Holmes flexes his bandaged hand. Because I needed to understand the physical requirements of the crime. When Inspector Hopkins described a slightly built clerk as his suspect, I knew immediately that was impossible. The strength required to drive a harpoon through a man's chest and 6 inches into oak planking behind him would require someone extraordinarily powerful. A professional harpooner, most likely. Those experiments, Holmes continues, confirmed that only someone with years of practice and tremendous upper body strength could accomplish such a feat. That eliminated most suspects and pointed me towards someone from Black Peter's maritime past. From there, it was simply a matter of investigating his crew records and setting a trap with the logbook advertisement. So tell me, detective, did you recognize that the murder weapon itself pointed to a specific type of killer? Could you understand why Cairns waited 5 years to take his revenge? And what does this case teach us about the difference between legal justice and moral justice? This brutal mystery reminds us that some men live their lives creating enemies, sowing seeds of violence that eventually bloom into their own destruction. Black Peter thought his maritime past was behind him, that he could retire to peaceful Sussex and drink away his memories. But the sea has a long memory, and so do the men who sail upon it. It also shows us that murder is never simple, never purely black and white. Patrick Cairns killed a man who arguably deserved killing, yet he must still face punishment. The law cannot excuse violence, even when the victim was himself violent. That's what separates civilization from chaos. Not perfect justice, but consistent application of rules that prevent us all from becoming vigilantes. Join me next time as we investigate The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, where Holmes faces the most dangerous and despicable villain he's ever encountered, a man who destroys lives not with violence but with blackmail and carefully cultivated secrets.